Well, it's a busy time in the orchard, especially for pruning our various fruit crops. And today I'm going to show you how to prune some of the smaller fruits, particularly grapes, blueberries, and blackberries. Now, the grape is probably the most confusing when it comes to trying to prune them because there's so much growth on them, it's really confusing as far as where you even start. But it is important to remember that you do need to prune the grapes annually. And really what happens if you get too much viney growth on them, they become less productive. And also you want to keep in mind that you need to know where the fruit is going to be produced. And on grapes, the fruit will be produced in clusters on this current season's growth, but it comes off of one-year-old wood. So what happens if you don't prune the grapes and you keep letting them get woodier and woodier, your fruit production will be at the very end of the vine. So that's why you want to come in and clean some of this out. And if you look closely here, this is a cane from last year, and this is last year's growth, and you can see that there's still some fruit clusters that had dried up on there. So that was current season growth last year that came off of a one-year-old cane. So what we want to do is select the one-year-old canes, and we'll go in and do some pruning. And I'm going to try to do different stages and walk you through this, but before we get started, it's important to remember that on your pruning tools, and try to size them up based on your cuts. If we're going to need to make some real woody cuts, we would use a saw where we can make the larger cuts. We'll use the loppers most readily in here, and then we'll use the hand pruners as well. But also, depending on the various crops that you're going to be pruning on, especially some of your fruit trees, it's a good idea to keep the equipment lubricated, and then in between cuts you may need to dip it and sterilize it either in like a 10% Clorox solution or using rubbing alcohol. On the grapes, we're not so much concerned about it, but in the blackberries, we'll really be using it because of some diseases that we've had. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to start pruning this one half, and I'll bring you back on and show you how the progress is going. Well, you can see that I've cut quite a bit off on this half, and there's quite a contrast now. But before I explain to you what we've done, I want to remind you of the anatomy of the grape just to kind of help you understand the process and the growth habit. First of all, of course, we've got it planted here in the ground with our crown, and that is our main trunk, this woodiest part that goes right up to the very top. And we've trained it to a 4-arm system on 2 different wires. And so what we have here, we have our arms that start out this way, but we always keep renewal spurs here, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Go right on up again the trunk, and then we have 2 more arms that branch out, which then turn into our canes. Now what I've done is each one of these are called a spur. And usually you want to try to get about, anywhere from 10, 12 to 14 spurs, and that's how long you want the particular arm to be. And then on each spur, try to keep around 2 to 3 buds on each spur. And remember, those buds will break dormancy, start growing, and the growth that comes off this one-year-old spur will then have our fruit on it this year. Now, your most productive fruiting wood is going to be between about the 4th bud or spur to the 12th, so it's going to be right in this area. Now, it looks like we've not left a lot on there, but I promise you that the growth will be so aggressive during the summer that you'll have to keep up with it even to try to keep it on the wires. So again, anywhere from 4 to 12 spurs. Now if this arm would be too woody and we need to come back and start another one thing that you can do with your renewal spurs is start a new arm. So what we could essentially do is just tie this one down to the wire and force it to grow out and become the arm, and we could just cut this one off. Now if we were to cut this off, I would probably do it right here, so the following year then we could start a new arm from this particular one if we needed to do so. But our arm is not too woody yet, it's still in pretty good shape, so we'll continue to leave it for a while to get some new production. Now last year on this particular one, we did that. The arm was too woody, so we cut it off all the way and we let one of our shoots grow out to become the main arm. So you can see it's not as woody as this one is. So you can rotate them out. You could even cut this out and force this growth and still get some production on it, probably more than you would imagine. So again, don't be afraid to go in and do some drastic pruning. Just remember that the fruit comes off of one-year-old canes or spurs on that current season growth, and that way you'll stay out of trouble in cutting all your fruiting wood off. Now down here, if you'll look closely, we have another young arm that started, and there's a lot of this growth here that we don't want. So what I will do is I'll leave one of these to become our renewal arm again, or spur, and I'll just leave it about two buds, and then I'll come in and cut the rest of this off. And I'm going to need to use the loppers to cut the end of this one off. I can get it in here. And then we'll work back a little bit more to not damage our buds there. So this one then could essentially become an arm if it needed to be. Then all I'll do is go along, and everywhere there's a spur that when I leave, 2 to 3 buds, and then I just keep going down until I've counted to 12, and then we'll pull all this other growth out, and that's the way you would get it to look just like what we've done on this half. Now the other thing, remember in pruning grapes, you want to try to do it before the buds start swelling. And also the other thing to do before the buds start swelling, if you have problems in the past with black rot, the fungus disease, which has little black specks on the fruit and they'll dry up and rot on you, it's a fungus disease. You also, after you get it pruned, before the buds swell, you want to use a dormant spray of Bordeaux mixture. And then to keep it under control, depending on the moisture and the amount of rain, you may have to spray 4 to 5 more times throughout the season, anywhere from 7, 10 to 14 days apart, to keep it under control, to prevent it from rotting the fruit off. And after that first spray of dormant spray using Bordeaux mixture, you can then use basic copper sulfate, diphane, balaton, manzate, or sulfate. And sometimes it's a good idea to rotate those out and just check with your garden centers to see what's available and follow the directions. But prevention is the key in controlling black spot. Well, now let's go over and try to do a little bit of pruning with our blueberries. Now our blueberry bed has been here about 6 years, and probably the past 3 years we've had pretty good production. The hardest thing about growing the blueberries is trying to keep that soil pH very acidic. And the easiest thing really is the pruning. And all you need to remember again is that the blueberries produce fruit on last year's wood or 1 year old season growth. And you can see the color difference here, this greener color, and the buds are swollen a little bit more. That's where our fruit is going to be produced. Now here is a whip, so to speak, that's last year's growth. We'll get a little bit of fruit right in here, but because it's so tall, these are more really foliage buds up here, so we're going to tip it a little bit just to keep our growth in this area. Now really during the dormant season like this, the only thing that you need to keep in mind in pruning is any real old wood in the center that maybe is dead or diseased, and we've got a few places in here that we can cut some out. And the other thing is to remember too that in some of these areas you may have to use a saw to get to them a little bit easier. Now this particular branch here is quite a woody branch, but again you can see last year's growth where we'll have all of our fruit. It needs to be topped so we'll send out more suckers, and that's part of the pruning practice in blueberries, is just sending out suckers to get new growth on them. But what we'll do on this particular one, we'll wait and we'll enjoy the harvest on it here during the early summer, and then after that we'll tip it out, and that will force new growth up. And then also at that time, any of the older wood that's really not dead or diseased, we'll go ahead and thin some of it out again to get more suckers. So you want a lot of sucker growth in the blueberries to almost form a hedge. Other than that, tipping a little bit during the dormant season, getting the dead diseased branches out, really that's all there is to it. And watching that pH. Now there's another small fruit that takes a little bit more attention, and it's a little more of a challenge just to work with it than the blueberries, and that's the blackberry bed. Well, the hardest part about pruning blackberries is the thorns, obviously, unless you have a thornless cultivar. Now our varieties here are what we call a semi-erect or an erect variety, which don't require any pruning. But really, if you'll remember, there's 2 times a year that you need to be involved with the blackberries as far as pruning. And the first time would be during the summer when your new canes grow up, And then after they get, about 3 feet, you want to go in and top them, and you can see where we've done that this past summer. That will then encourage side shoots, which is where your fruit's going to come on off of those 1-year-old canes, or primo canes as they're called. So what we want to do this time of year is go in and on these side shoots, go in and just tip them to about 18 inches, and then our fruit will be produced right along those canes. And again, anywhere from 12 to 18 inches, and we'll just go through and do that on all of them, and that makes it a little bit easier to get into the fruit. Now we'll get a lot of growth again, but again, that's all right because our fruit will thin it out a little bit as we go. Now the other thing too, notice the difference in coloration on this cane. I've already cut it out because it's pretty congested down there, but this is a cane that's really 2 years or older. Those are non-productive. They won't produce any fruit, and a lot of them are starting to become diseased as well. So you want to go in and cut all of the things off that are very brown or over 2 years old. And when you're cutting those off, if you'll fix up some kind of a bucket like this, you can go in and then dip your shears in a 10% Clorox solution as you're going through to make your pruning cuts. So again, really this time of year you want to cut off the side shoots about 18 inches, remove any of the non-productive, dead, diseased wood, and you'll be in good shape on your blackberries. Now we have a new fact sheet out on blackberries. It's number 6215, and it talks about home culture of blackberries, talks about cultivars for Oklahoma, some of the cultural practices, and of course pruning that we've just talked about. But I promise the time's running out on how you need to get out and get this pruning done, and just remember that this hard work this time of year will pay off in the long run when it comes harvest time this summer.